Of all of the tell-alls to come out of the Trump administration, it turns out this one might actually be the most important one. This is former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' memoir. It's called The Chief's Chief. As a book, it was sort of a flop. It sold less than 22,000 copies. But as a piece of evidence, well, the research that went into this book might be key to one of the special counsel's investigations. CNN reports tonight that in the summer of 2021, two people working on The Chief's Chief, ghostwriters, met with former President Trump at his Bedminster Golf Club, and one of Trump's aides recorded that meeting. This was a full year before Trump began giving the classified documents he took with him back to the federal government. But this recording reportedly has Trump on tape talking about classified documents he still had, and CNN reports that special counsel Jack Smith now has this tape. Now, NBC News has not yet independently verified this reporting, and CNN has not actually heard the tape. They have only had it described to them by multiple sources. But on the recording, Trump reportedly acknowledges he held on to a classified Pentagon document about a potential attack on Iran. And then there's this, sort of unbelievably, sources told CNN that the recording captures the sound of paper rustling as if Trump were waving the document around. On the tape. The Guardian's Hugo Lowell expanded on this reporting tonight, saying that his sources tell him this document was classified at the secret level, which is the kind of document the DOJ would be inclined to bring charges for. Lowell also reports that the Trump aide who made this recording typically taped meetings between Trump and journalists because Trump didn't trust journalists. Lowell reports that that aide had her laptop and her devices imaged earlier this year, so Jack Smith likely has even more tapes. And if all of that were not bad enough, this tape also reportedly blows up one of Trump's primary defenses that he has been trying to lay out for himself here. Quote, on the recording, Trump's comments suggest he would like to share the information, but he is aware of limitations on his ability post-presidency to declassify records. Acknowledgement of that in his own words and on tape more than a year before Trump started claiming that he could declassify documents just by thinking about them. Feels huge. Something tells me more people will end up listening to this tape than reading Mark Meadows' actual book. Joining us now is Mary McCord, former Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice and current Executive Director of Georgetown Law's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. Mary, thank you for being with us tonight. What, in your mind, does this tape and the existence of it do to Trump's defense?
Well, I think it makes clear if he's on, a recording, and we know the power in front of juries of actually listening to a defendant's own words on a tape recording. It sounds like he pretty much acknowledged having classified information, which at other times he and his lawyers have suggested that he had no knowledge that classified information was taken from the White House. It also shows that he's aware he can't share classified information. He pointedly seems to say, according to the reporting, that, I have this information about General Milley's plans to attack Iran, and I sure wish I could show it to you, but I can't do that because it's classified. Now, I'll note, I think that's a decent possibility that the former president was simply making up that he had classified information written by General Milley, because the reporting also indicates he was pretty mad at General Milley. He had this interview at Bedminster with these writers who were working on Mark Meadows' book very shortly after news reporting had come out that General Milley, in fact, had tried to convince Trump not to do some sort of attack on Iran. And he was pretty aggravated about that reporting, according to what I've read today in CNN and other news outlets. And, this could very much be another case of the former president being petty and wanting to suggest to these writers, I've got something that would disprove General Milley, but I can't share it because it's classified. Now, General Milley knows, and probably Jack Smith knows, whether a real document exists. And if a real document exists, that certainly puts him in additional legal jeopardy in terms of his criminal culpability for mishandling classified documents. But even if the document doesn't exist, even if he was making it up, it still shows his intent and his knowledge that he had classified information and he wasn't supposed to, and that he knows that you can't share classified information with other people.
Yeah, and certainly we have no idea whether it's an actual document or just a blank piece of paper that Trump is using as a prop. But if let's suspend our concerns for a moment and just walk with me through the timeline and how it changes if indeed the former president has classified documents in Bedminster in 2021. That would radically shift our understanding of how and where the documents were moved and the degree to which this obstruction case could be built, would it not?
Absolutely, because even, there's so many varying stories about how classified documents came to be in Trump's possession. But, one of the most predominant stories is that they were loaded into boxes when he moved out of the White House, and they were taken to Mar-a-Lago, and they were stored in that storage unit in Mar-a-Lago. And if there are other documents at Bedminster, how did they get there? That's inconsistent with the story about where things were moved when they packed up the White House. That means either they had gotten there some previous time to packing up the White House, or they came after the White House was packed up. If they were moved to Bedminster after the White House was packed up, the question is why, and what's the timing of that?